the only Catholic church.
And these are our granddaughters, Celine and Alina. Alina is going to be a junior this fall at WVU, and Celine just is graduating from Washington High School in Charlestown, and she's going to be going off to Shepherd. So this is their first time attending house church.
Wonderful.
Rosie?
Oh, introducing everyone, I'm Rosie Graff. This is my dad, Bob. So this is Dad's house. And I don't know, I've been coming to house church for like, I think it's been 3 or 4 years now at least. So, wow, and I love it.
She helped me on Tuesday night clean up the mess in here so it looked nice.
We both agreed that we want to keep hosting here for a very long time. It's very good for us to do a monthly heavy cleaning.
And Rich Kowalczyk, everybody knows I'm with Donna. That's my wife over there.
Bob Graff. Go ahead.
Cynthia Turns.
Hi, Pat Turns, married to Cynthia Turns.
Carol Grant, that has known the Graff family for a long time. We moved in about the same, came here about the same time. And I think I've mentioned it before, but our home was directly across the river from theirs. So Bob had a, what would you call that photograph? It was the
Aerial photograph.
aerial photograph and pinpointed our two houses. So we proved it.
I'm Roger E. Sear. I'm a friend of the group's.
I'm Susie Suarez. I'm cousins with Rosie and cousin Bob.
Barbara Bowles, come up from Baltimore.
Danny Lutz, just up the road here.
I'm Fred Brigham.
And I'm Ann Brigham.
I'm in the witness chair today. So we're going to discuss St. Augustine today, but before I do that, we developed an opening prayer in the form of meditation each time, and we want also an opening prayer and a prayer to keep in mind remember the leadership and the love and the vision of Ginny, with Bob, and all groups that were here before Dan and I joined, remembering her and all she means to all of us as part of the group, and ask for her to join us in her vision with the Lord in today's discussion. And I'm going to start off with a brief reading from Teilhard de Chardin, and that will lead into the meditation, and Richard's going to come out, I'll tell you where the meditation begins, and I'm going to read for the meditation from an author that I've used before for that, Judy Carnaro, who is well-versed in astrophysics, but also is very spiritual and mystical in her writing, and she, prior to her dying of cancer at age 56, she gave many retreats. She raised 2 children, and she was a professor. So when she brought together, I think, that showed how religion and faith can relate to what we know about science and what we know about the universe in which we are all a part. And Teilhard de Chardin was the one for us. We talked to him last year. I presented 2 presentations based on his writings on cosmogenesis, and that's what I'm trying to, when I gave the title to Augustine in the Googleplex, to say, what are you doing that for? Because I feel Augustine, by some people, is locked away in the past as a nice guy who thought well, but he's not relevant. I taught him in classical languages and patristic languages for 15 years. And the 2 works that I taught in Latin were one of Confessions, which we'll discuss part of today, and his City of God, Civitas Dei. And even since I've been teaching, I've learned more about him and respected him more for his intelligence and his vision. He was locked in, I'll talk about that later in the actual introduction. Start off with this short quote from Maria Shalom. He said, for a Christian, the real is charged with a divine presence in the entirety of its tangible layers. As the mystics knew and felt, everything becomes physically and literally lovable in God, and conversely, God can be possessed and loved in everything around us. What can this mean except that every action, as soon as it is oriented towards Him, takes on, without any change in itself, the psychic character of a center-to-center relationship, that is to say, of an act of love. Through charity, then, this is a comment on this statement, man can unite himself to the terminus of all human progress, even while dedicating himself to the onward movement at any particular moment in time. The union accomplished in loving and being loved by God transcends the whole order of becoming, and thereby balances expectation with possession, and surrounds the relative with an all-embracing absolute. This is why the creative presence of God in the world is so central a theme in Teilhard's thought. He sees the whole movement of evolution as a mode by which a divine presence is mediated to the world. And it is precisely by charity that we enter into this presence. To the extent that one's commitment to an endless series of relatives is impregnated with charity, it becomes an element in one's union with God, and therefore of absolute significance. It becomes a force, but for promoting that peace and capacity to rest, which so many have lost in the turmoil of our technological age. That's the introduction to the meditation. And Richard has provided a little background music there for us.
If he can do it.
I'd ask you to close your eyes. And imagine you are present 4.45 billion years ago, as Earth takes shape and begins to hang in orbit around the sun. Witness the cooling process and the way hot gases and liquids begin to form on outer crust. Watch in utter amazement as simple cells emerge and spring miraculously to life. See life multiply under the radiant light of the sun. Focus on a particular cell that draws your attention. And gaze at this cell as something incredible begins to happen. It starts to absorb the light from the sun. It begins to engage in the chemical reaction called photosynthesis. Marvel as this tiny cell gives off food and oxygen. Knowing that you are witness to an evolutionary movement that is truly revolutionary. Because of what you have witnessed, life on Earth will never be the same. Move forward in time a couple of billion years and gaze at the array of flora and fauna that profilates the land. There is no end to the beauty and grandeur of the spectacle before you. See a small, seemingly insignificant mammal stand erect and begin to walk. And know that you are witnessing a truly giant step for humankind and creation generally. Watch as this newly evolved creature learns to grasp objects with its hands and focus attention on them. It is astonished to see the development of language and the ability to communicate in symbols. Watch as the species continues to flourish and develop the capacity for self-awareness. See groups gather to tell stories around campfires and enact rituals that bear witness to their recognition of something greater than themselves. And now enter 1st century Palestine, to a region called Judea, and begin to listen as an itinerant preacher named Jesus begins to teach about a God whose nature is love and connection, sacrifice, and compassion. Finally, see yourself here now. Like all these moments you have just visited in your imagination, you are a product of evolution. Consider that you are connected to all these past moments in a vital way. Yet are also on the cusp of something new. As you sit in the radiant love of the Holy One, open yourself to that love and ask for the courage to respond to God's invitation to evolve. Does the metaphor of photosynthesis change your image of Jesus in his mission? How does it do that? What new thoughts or feelings do you have? What of his thought do you find challenging? Sit quietly for a moment. What does the Spirit want you to see? How do you respond? Radiant love, since time began, you have been communicating yourself to all creation. The initial flaring forth to the convergence of galaxies from the distant stars to Earth that you have made to be our home. You have never ceased shaping and fashioning and urging us toward life. We are truly amazed at the work of their hands and for the life of Jesus, who continues to teach us how to receive your radiance. We are humbly blessed by the gift of self-awareness that you've given as human beings. Help us to be mindful that we are the universe conscious of itself, and this capacity is not for our benefit alone, but for the good of all creation of man. We thank you for ongoing creation and for your invitation for each one of us to be co-creators with you. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
Fred, I really especially liked that first introductory part, and it seemed to me so relevant at this. We've had a beautiful spring week this week, and the concept of the relationship of the creator to the creation and the created back to the creator as an all-enveloping permanence in the middle of constantly evolving change is just a tremendous concept. And every spring comes back, it's the same, but it's different. It's always different. And there's always change, and hopefully for the better, but there's always change, there's always transience, there's always the existential moment. But then to surround it all with that relationship gives the permanence and the value to everything. It's tremendous. Thank you for it.
I hope you might find, when we look at Augustine, you think he's too far removed from what we just prayed and thought about, meditated on. My attempt will be to show from the beginning of his Confessions, the first part, how he would be very comfortable sitting with us here today. And certainly through his writings he is. Try and see if that works. So that's why I gave it sort of a different title. I didn't put Saint Augustine, I just said Augustine and Googleplex. It's not something, that title is not mine. A very well-known MacArthur Fellow, classical scholar and novelist named Rachel Goldstein wrote a book about 4 years ago called Plato and the Googleplex. And that she brought Plato into the 21st century by she even gave an internet address, and she had him debating with the executives of Google company. And she actually brought in some of his dialogues that he wrote. He wrote in dialogue form to answer their questions or debate them. And it was quite a phenomenal bit of scholarship on her part. And it was that. It took me a long read to read the whole thing through, but it was very well worth reading. And I thought of that as I was rereading Augustine's Confessions, which I taught for a number of years in Latin. And again, having gone through it this way, it moved on through different iterations of my own understanding of life in the universe, thanks to the house church here, and those who belong, shared so much with me. I'd like to focus, I typed out some selections from the early life of Augustine, because I feel I believe in those sections, you will see the way his mind works, and the way he thinks and the way he approaches learning is very in step with what we know about us and about the world around us through science, which he did not have access to at the time. He was working with what he had to work with. And just a brief summary of his life. He was born in North Africa in 354 AD in a little town called Augustine, which was in the country of North Africa called Numidia then. It's now Algeria. And he grew up there, and when he was 12 years old, he went to a nearby town which had pretty good schools, a place called Madaros. And he learned Latin and Greek. He hated Greek, did not like it at all. And he went from there, and from there, his father, who was a Roman patrician, was a Roman citizen, and he did not believe in Christianity as Catholicism. He was just a regular Roman citizen who went by the laws of David. At that time, the Roman Empire had become a Christian empire under Constantine 50 years before, in 325. And so his mother, Monica, was a Catholic. She was a special kind of Catholic at that time because in North Africa there was a strong group of Catholics, some of whom were extreme, called Donatists. And they were the group, or their approach to Christianity was under the leadership of a very powerful figure named Donatus, who got people to follow his interpretation of Scripture and reality around them in terms of faith. The reason they became controversial was because some of their bishops, or the bishops in North Africa and other places in the Roman Empire, had turned in some of their flock and some of their friends to the Emperor Domitian during the time of persecution, when a lot of Christians were put to death. And so they were called traitores, or traitors. So that question, if you would belong to the Donatist group, you had been a traitores. You had to be baptized again, because you would cut your link with belief in Christ. Well, his mother was not an extremist, and so some of the extreme people persisted in violence. But she was middle, a very devout person, not very literate, but a very good person, and she prayed for her son that he would become eventually baptized. And he was at least put on the road to that, as she called him, a catechumen, but he was a catechumen until he was 33 years old. So he went through a lot of changes in his life up until that time. So he wrote a lot of his works, over 100 works of his are still preserved. He gave almost 8,000 sermons when he became a bishop and priest. We have about 400 of those that have still survived. He had over 450 letters that have still survived. So we have a lot of in his documents, he preserved a lot of classical literature as well. He transmitted where the original documents were not preserved. The way he wrote what he did, he had scribes or people who took down. He walked around the room and had these people copying what he was saying, and they would transfer it to papyrus and then smooth it over and copy it over. He had about 7 or 8 people working for him, and it took him 3 or 4 years to writing that way, to write what we're talking, the Confessions. Another note about the Confessions is that we think of it in terms of confessions of sin, and because a lot of his references to the way he lived growing up in that period between, say, 16 and 32 or 33, he ran with a pretty wild crowd. Well, he refers to them that way, but some interpreters have made it. He was really total debauchery, but he wasn't. But he's very frank about some of the things he got involved with. He liked games. He liked the games of Gamecock, watching them compete. He liked going to the arena. And he did not like the way he was taught. He resisted disciplinary people. A lot of instructors beat people, beat wisdom into their people as a teacher. And He didn't like that. So he liked getting together with a group of friends and discussing things and talking them out. He followed the dialogue approach of Plato and people who followed him and later other classical writers, including Cicero. So that's the way you learn, is by asking questions, by sharing and arguing with your friends and people you respect. So that approach to learning was something he brought to the table, and it's evident in his writings. What you have to look in looking what I gave out to you throughout, because he's looking back at the way he's developed his approach to Christianity in his thinking process and his mistakes he believed he made. He'll intersperse as a person that now believes. So you've got to separate out in reading him his very firm and devoted faith in teaching the spirit of the gospel. That integrates it. Then there's the question of his style of writing in Latin, which is very highly respected. He is not only in his writing, but as a thinker. He took over the leadership in terms of Christian thinking from the Greek writers, people like Basil of Caesarea and Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Clement of Alexandria. They dominated the intellectual climate of those days up until his time, and he's the first. He was the first Latin father. There were others, Tertullian, Cyprian, and others, but he was the one that turned the corner on that, and he's probably the only writer of that period that is respected by people even who are non-Christian as a thinker, and as the way he approached life, the way he approached the approach to learning and the universe. In the Catholic Church, he's the only father that's quoted in Vatican II Council on Lumen Gentium, the whole dogmatic constitution of the Church. He's quoted 25 times. No other father was quoted that much. Because that's the change to what we're trying to work with now. He's the one they look to. So that's my overall introduction to him. And rather than read everything I have here, I just want to point out things. Look at the first part, which is opening prayer. Just point a couple of things out. I selected these two paragraphs in the opening of his confessions. One other note about the confessions. Confession does not mean, as it was used in that time in Latin, it doesn't mean confessing one's sin. It means I'm bearing witness to what I believe and what I've gone through. It's better called, as Gary Wills in his book on Augustine's, testimony. And yet, because people have superimposed current day language and thought about confession and sin on Augustine, they immediately think whenever he talks about wrongdoing, he's talking about sexual sin or things of that nature. Everything's bad. He is, but in a different context. He's more concerned about his whole learning process as an individual. And in terms of what is truth, what is absolute? Is there anything absolute in this world? That's what he's asking of. He's going up steps of stairs to find it. Can he find us? Can he find it now? Where do I go to find this? To whom do I talk? And he went down many corridors, wrong-way streets in the process. So I think it's important to recognize that about him, because when we look at people who made a difference in our civilization, the way we think today, the great scientists, the philosophers, the people who have made excellent use of technology and developed how we can use things that at least hopefully make life better for us. A lot of them have gone through the same process. And he, in many cases, has been an inspiration those people who made a difference in our life. So in that first paragraph, he says, you know, you are great, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is your power and your wisdom. There is no limit. And man who is proud of your creation wishes to praise you. Man who bears within himself his mortality, who bears about within himself his mortality, who bears about within himself testimony to his sin and testimony that you resist the proud. Yet man, this part of your creation wishes to praise you. You arouse him to take joy in praising you, for you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you, O Lord. That particular line has been often quoted many times over by many authors over the years. Grant me to know and understand which is first to call upon you and to praise upon you, and also which is first to know you and to call upon you. But how does one who does not know you call upon you? For one who does not know you might call upon another instead of you. Or must you rather be called upon so that you may be known? Yet how shall they call upon him in whom they have not believed? Or how shall they believe without a preacher? And they will praise the Lord that seek him. For they seek him, find him, and finding him they shall praise him. Lord, may me seek you by calling upon you, and let me call upon you by believing in you. For you have been preached to us, Lord. My faith calls upon you, that faith which you have given to me, which you have breathed into me by the incarnation of your Son, and through the ministry of your preacher, the preacher being St. Ambrose. And the quote he has from Scripture there, how can they call upon him in whom they have been, that's from Romans, St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. And then we get to the divine attributes, and at this point where I'd like to give you an example of the poetry of his Latin prose. I'm going to read this same paragraph here in Latin. This part in here is, most high, most good, most mighty, oh most mighty, most merciful and most just, most hidden and most present, most beautiful and most strong, stable and incomprehensible, unchangeable, yet changing all things, never new and never old, yet renewing all things, leading proud men to senility, although they know it not, ever active and ever at rest, gathering in, yet needing nothing, supporting, fulfilling, and protecting things, creating, nourishing, and perfecting them, searching them out, although nothing is lacking in you. You love, but are not inflamed with passion. You are jealous, yet free from care. You repent, but do not sorrow. You grow angry and remain tranquil. You change your works, but do not change your plan. You take back what you have found, although you have never lost it. You are never in want, but you rejoice in gain. You are never covetous, yet you exact usury. Excessive payments are made to you, so that you may be our debtor. Yet who is anything that is not yours? You pay debts, although you owe no man anything. You cancel debts and lose nothing. What have we said, my God, my life, my holy delight? Or what does any man say when he speaks of you? Yet woe to those who keep silent concerning you, since even those who speak are as the dumb. Now, that's, a lot of that is from his use of types of speech in Latin, paradigms of speech, and it doesn't, the beauty of his Latin doesn't come through in that particular, the English translation. I wanted to read just a bit of in Latin to show you, see the difference. I also point out there that he's touching on, he sees things change and he sees things that are unchangeable. And a lot of what we know through science about evolution, about us and about the universe, recognizes that there's constant change in every form of life. There's constant change in consciousness and learning. But he wasn't quite seeing it that way, but he was touching on it. He was grasping at it based on where he was when he wrote this, which was after we'd gone through the conversion process. And so that same passage was in Latin sounds this way, because he starts off, what then is my God? What I ask unless the God. God, what is the Lord but the Lord, or who is God for our God? The word for God is Deus. Quid is ergo Deus meus? Quid rogo? Visi Dominus Deus. Quis enim Dominus, praeter Domini, ad quis praeter Deum nostrum. sume, optime, potentissime, optentissime, misericordiatissime, et justissime, secretissime et presentissime, pulcherrime et fortissime, stabilis incompressibilis, immutabilis mutans omnia, numquam novus, numquam vetus, innovens omnia, in vedestatum perducent subermus in nescia, semper agens, semper quitos, collagens et non-agents, portents et implants et protogens, crayons et nutrients, perficiens, querens, cum nickel desit tibi, amas nec estuas, celus et socorris es, pedite et non volus, merasceris et tranquillis, opera mutus, vera mutas concilium, regibus quod infinis, et numquam amicisti, numquam inops, et gaudus lucrus, numquam avaris, et usurus aegis, superagata tibi, ut debias, et quis habet quisquam non tuum, redus debita, nulli debiens, donus debita, nicol perdens, et quid diximus Deus meus, vida mea, ut caelo mea sancta, ad quid dicit aliquis, tum te dicit, e vei tacentibus de te quoniam lacrias mutis sunt.
Fred, your reading was great. I have to say, you read it with such inflection and interpretation, I could understand it almost. It was great. You read it better in Latin than English.
He's more comfortable in Latin.
What's he really saying here, though? I mean, he's saying you're all things. You're one thing, but you're the opposite.
Well, he's trying to get his head around what life is all about with God. Because keep in mind that when he's writing this, he's converted. He's been baptized. He believes. So faith is a difference. But leading up to faith, he goes through all these questions he has about life and life around him. And he fell into the trap of pulling. What opened the door for him, we'll discuss in the subsequent pages, was a work of Cicero called Hortensius. He loved Cicero's prose, because he was training to teach speaking, rhetorician. He was trained to be a rhetorician, and he was a good one. He got paid for that. He got a job in North Africa, and then when he went to Rome, he had a little trouble competing. There were a lot of really highly paid, well-paid teachers, and then some students of his took a walk on him and didn't pay him for his teaching. And then he got a good job in Milan later. This is where things really started to come together for him. But in the meantime, in this whole effort to find the truth of what life is about, he got caught up in a group called the Manichaeans. We'll get to that. And that he got locked in for them for about 9 years, and he wasn't totally happy with them, but he stayed with them for a number of different reasons. But on the next page, I'm going to talk about his childhood, and I have a quote here from Carl Jaspers, the psychologist. Augustine thinks and questions. So what you have here in the Confessions is he talks what he did. So so he's talking here now. What he's talking about, the way a child learns to communicate and think. I learned to speak as a baby, not inhibited by fear of punishment. Surrounded by coddling nurses, laughing games, and happy play. I learned about others' punitive insistence that I learned without their punitive insistence that I learned, from my own heart's need to deliver what I was laboring for, the Latin word being pariente, to be pushed forward to the outer world, trying to communicate. I picked up words from anyone who spoke to me, not just from tutors, and somehow did labor forth my feelings in others' ears. Unfettered inquisitiveness, it is clear, teaches better than do intimidating assignments. That's where he's taking a shot at people who beat people. So, and then he said, my inner sense, with that, he said, my inner sense, I guarded the integrity of my outer senses, and I delighted in truth. I was always looking for what really made things work. In such little things and in thoughts about such little, I didn't want to err, I didn't want to make mistakes. In my studies I didn't. I was endowed with a strong memory. I was well attached, and I was well instructed in speech. I was refined in friendship. He loved his friends. Not just as friends, but people that he had good times with, but people he learned with. I shunned sadness, dejection, and ignorance. What was there that was not wonderful and praiseworthy in such a living being? Well, he was remembering the happy days of his childhood and his learning experience then. He had some tough times to come, which he'll describe. But he says now he waxes into his present belief and faith interviewing here. All these things are gifts of my God. I did not give them to myself. These things really plagued him, as it still plagues everyone in life, is the problem of evil. Why do so many bad things happen? What bad people do to good people, or good people unwittingly may do something wrong without even knowing they're doing it wrong. So the whole problem of evil, every religion faces that. Every philosopher is faced with it who has any. So at least Plato, first of all, the Manichaeans offered him more of an answer there. So I want to take up the next piece, his introduction to philosophy. That's what the sentence in that paragraph that I want to mention that's key is, he said about Cicero, I came upon a certain Cicero whose tongue almost all admire, but not his heart. Well, please forgive some typos I have here. My computer crashed on me, and when I had hold of this done, I had to do it over on my daughter's computer. Not an excuse, but that's why they're there. And right hand didn't have a chance to copy read it. Copy edited, rather. So this work contains this exhortation to philosophy and it's called Hortensius. The book changed my affections. It turned my prayers to you, Lord, and caused me to have a different purpose and desire. All my vain hopes forthwith became worthless to me. With the incredible argument, I desired unifying wisdom, because what did the Hortensius, Quarto was a corrupt politician in Rome. And Cicero was trying to straighten him out and tell him that there's better things out there. Take a look at what Aristotle wrote in his Protrepticon about what's really wisdom and how you get there. And what we know about that through philosophy shows there is a basic good in all of what we know in life. So, not from a scientific point of view, but from a logical reasoning point of view, Cicero is quoting to Hortensius in his exhortation room to back off from this corruption. Look at what the real philosopher has to say about life. So that's what's going on there. So that had meaning to him because he said, I began to rise up that I might return to you again. He's coming back as a converted person to how he is now as he writes this. I did not use that book to sharpen my tongue, and I seemed to purchase with the money my mother gave to me since I was in my 19th year, and my father had died 2 years before. I did not use then to use it to sharpen my tongue, nor to impress me by way of speaking, but rather what it spoke. In other words, I wasn't just looking at the way Cicero wrote, but the message he had there. Because it turned him on, it was pulling away. Now, you have to keep versus what is of the flesh. The original Plato did not think of this just as some Christian writers picked up on it at that time. But they did. And so that's part of what you see in Augustine here. That's part of what drove him, sort of kept him in the Manichaean thing for a while till he sort of was a lot of talk and bluffing and not really getting at the substance of what life was about as far as he was concerned. So he talks about a changing universe and convert us and show us your love, your face, O God of hosts, and we shall be saved. For whatever way the soul of man turns, it is fixed upon beautiful things that are outside of you, even though it is fixed upon beautiful things that are outside of you and outside of itself. Yet these beautiful things would not be at all unless they came from you. They rise, they set, and by rising is where they begin to be. They increase so as to become perfect. And once made perfect, they grow old and die. And even though all things do not grow old, yet all die. Therefore, when they take their rise and strive to be, the more quickly they grow so that they may be, so much the faster do they hasten towards ceasing to be. This is the law of their being. So much have you given them because they are parts of things that do not exist at all. But all of them, by successive departures in advance, make up the universe of they are the parts. See too how our speech is accomplished by significant sounds. There will be no complete speech unless each word departs, when all parts have uttered, so that it might be followed by another. For all these things let my soul praise you. These things go where they are going, so that they may cease to be, thus rend the soul asunder with passionate desires. For the soul wishes to be, and it loves to find rest in things that it loves. But in such things there is no place where it may find rest, for they do not endure. They flee away, and who can follow them by fleshly sense? Who can grasp them even when they are close at hand? Fleshly sense is slow because it's fleshly sense that is nature. It suffices for certain things for which it was made. It does not suffice for something different, namely the hold fast things running the course from their proper beginning to their proper end. And in your word by which they were created, they hear from these words, from here unto there. So, what he's noting there, he's very observant of what we all know about ourselves, about what changes in us as we grow older, and it is experiences each day. That part he can hold on, that makes sense to him, but some of the explanations that he's heard from the Manichees is not. Now, because he believes, as he writes this, what he didn't believe, now he has believing that Christ is the beginning and the end. Christ is Lord. We know that, in effect, the Lord of all, the beginning of all of who we are and what we are about, is a being is a being that is created love and compassion. And despite that, and then we have this whole challenge of evolution, which he's indirectly understanding by seeing things that are changed in the universe. That's what's there. I should probably. Any questions? Later? Anyone?
It's not easy to understand, Fred.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think through some of this stuff, Fred, so let me just throw out what I'm thinking, and you tell me if I'm right or not. Okay, so he becomes a Manichee, and he's attracted to at least an explanation of life, of what it's all about, but then finds the explanation too simple. And is it too simple to say that he does because it doesn't comport with his own experience of reality, of creation, of living and dying, and that within all of creation there isn't just a dualism between good and evil, there's a constant encompassing of all of it. You die, that's not necessarily a good thing. You age, that's not necessarily a good thing. You suffer illness, that's not necessarily a good thing. But it isn't the bad spirit acting on your good mind that's causing this. You have to look at a unified creation and God as the creator of all of that and your relationship to him within that. And then I was thinking as you're going through this that, we still struggle with this today. I mean, there's an awful lot of folks around that would probably be good Manichees, So I don't, maybe it's an eternal struggle he's going through here of man trying to find the answer to what these truths are all about.
I think the explanations that Fred's given are excellent. And I seem to follow what you're saying very well. And I'm comparing it to what I call the latest inspired writing, which is the Course in Miracles, today. Of course, in Miracles, where he grapps with evil, of course, in Miracles is saying evil doesn't exist. Evil, I mean, if you're thinking correctly, everything turns into miracles. But what the common denominator is, what he's saying, is love. Love is centered in his thinking. Love is the center in the Course in Miracles.
That's why I believe he would relate very well with Shaitan. He didn't know Shaitan. They didn't know each other personally. They were to share their approach to life and learning. There's a lot they have in common, and I think that the experience we have today when people who claim to be religious but don't really present themselves as people who care about others, but they will use their, and many times it's very sincere, that their belief that this is the way to live, and either get on the boat, get on the same train with us, or get off, if we're going the right way. That bringing that into politics, which has happened in every age in some way or other. That's why he said he got sick and tired of the Manichaeans yelling truth, but they weren't really answering his questions about life. They weren't living the way they talked. And he wasn't the way he saw this. He couldn't use. I mean, try to put yourself at this time when the Roman Empire is falling down. The Visigoths are coming in. One of them, Alaric, is a baptized Christian that he's persecuting and killing people rest of life, and in the name of the Lord, into Rome, destroying Rome, and civilization is going through a big change for them. And where Augustine grew up, he was a very educated, in Carthage was a very luxurious and respected city. People lived well there. It was the best of learning. And yet, in the fringes of it were the Berbers. The Berbers are still there. They're still going from place to place in tents. And they were the heritage of the Punic people who lived there. They're still very active. So you have still a group of nomadic nation or peoples right in the vicinity of what was a very cultural center. And Northern Africa, for Roman society, when Rome was in its greatest strength, was the playground for the woman. They had villas there, they would have their good times there, right on the sea, as it was now Algeria. So that all was coming down. And so people, not just Augustine, but they were grasping for what was going to save us from what's happened. The world that we've known is departing from. It's like today, with the way technology is advancing a lot of the things we do, but it's taking away a lot of the things that we consider we're comfortable with.
And I do feel like the barbarians have breached the gates already these days.
I know. So you have a lot of.
I have a question. So I'm trying to understand the part where he was reading the scriptures, and we talked a little bit about that already. And so because I in my life have that same struggle constantly of trying to get something out of scripture. I get something out of coming here, and I get something out of being with people that are trying to do things to advance humanity and to help other humans, but I have a really hard time reading that and getting that message from the scriptures. And it sounds like at first that was his impression of them too, but then he also said that there was something more to be revealed there, something deeper. So who was his teacher, or who helped him to find more in the scriptures? Like, how did he wrestle with that and then find higher meaning?
As I will mention, the bridge to that for him was his exposure to a Christian named Simplicianus, really introduced him to scripture in the context of his Neoplatonic philosophy, his approach to the use of Neoplatonic philosophy. The writer that was most prominent in those days, he got into that, he opened the door when he read Hortensius of Cicero, but Plotinus was a philosopher who lived between 205 and 270 AD. And in that particular time of Augustine's life, he was very prominent. Neoplatonism made a lot of sense to thinking people. And even in his treatise that he writes later on, after he was converted on the Trinity, Augustine uses some Neoplatonic language, or at least concepts, to understand the Trinity, the different levels of being, which would be included the Father, the Son, the Nous, the one with all the information, the Father, the Word who understood it, and it was the image of the Father's knowledge was the Word. We talk the Word, and then the whole Spirit. So that triad, the Neoplatonic triad, became a way of the Christians believing. It was a sort of a philosophical foundation, if you will, of what we believe about the Trinity. It made sense to him. It made sense to Ciprianus. Ciprianus was a well-educated man. He became a good friend of Augustine, and Ambrose opened the door for him. He liked Ambrose as a preacher. He got him interested in going back to the scriptures after his first negative encounter and getting a better understanding of them. But even then, he wasn't really friendly with him. He was both, Ambrose was a public official and became a bishop. And bishops in those days didn't wear, all due respect to our present bishop, no mitres or croziers. I mean, all Augustine wore was a gray tunic, that's all. Bishops were a dime a dozen in North Africa. It was 700 when he was living. So what I'm getting at is the pomp and circumstance that sort of latched on in the Middle Ages was not there then, in that sense. They were there to teach, to preach, and to administer the sacraments.
Did you mention, or was it somewhere in the earlier reading when he said he was into scripture, started reading it, he rejected it until he learned to read it with an allegorical meaning rather than a literal meaning? I think that's what I thought of when you were talking, Rosie. You have to step back from the words and look at the whole bigger picture of what's going on and be in search of an explanation for in relationship to the Creator and reality.
So,
Fred, it's not clear to me, to whom does he give credit for his early education? Because he rejects his Berber heritage, yet the North African tribes such as the Berbers and Dorgons.
But no, he wasn't part of Berber heritage.
His mother was a Berber.
Well, yep. Well, his brother was illiterate. By that I mean, culturally he was not a Berber.
But I would say his mother was a Berber and he came from North Africa. And the Berbers, Dorgons, and had tremendous civilizations at the time.
Berbers at the time were not, I meant by that there was a nomadic group there that he did not relate to them. It wasn't part of his learning process, except that he knew who they were. They were part of it.
But did they look down at them because they were nomadic?
I didn't mean to imply that he looked down. There's nothing that he says.
You didn't consider them second-class
There was nothing he
citizens?
says in his writings. I just use that as a background to show the contrast in the society of that time. That's what I meant. Interjection. Artie, then he got into, when he was scarcely 20, he looked into, that was because it's more contentious. He looked at certain writings of Aristotle called the 10 categories, and he talks about, I gaped at the very name as in suspense, a thing somehow magnificent and divine, whenever my teacher, rhetorician at Carthage, along with others who were learned men, had praised the words with cheeks bursting and moving with pride. What did it profit me that I read and understood these writings by myself alone? When I conferred with others who said they could hardly withstand them, although taught by learned teachers, not only by lectures, but also by diagrams drawn in the sun, they were able to tell me no more than what I had grasped myself. The book seemed to me to speak clearly enough of substances such as man is, and what are then in them, such as man's figure, and what quality he is, his stature, how many feet tall he is, his relationships, who his brother is, where he's placed, when he was born, whether he stands or sits, whether he's short of shoes, or whether he does something or has something done to him. And the innumerable things that I found